Hello, everyone. This is Jeremy Dennis, lead artist of Moz House. Thanks for joining us on the Moz House podcast. Today, we're joined by Ella Mahoney, a Brooklyn-based Wampanoag artist, illustrator, and educator whose vibrant, flowing works bring indigenous stories to life. Raised on Aquinnah, on Martha's Vineyard, Ella draws from her community's deep connection to land, water, and language. With a BFA from the School of Visual Arts and an MA in art education from Pratt, she blends traditional storytelling with contemporary practices, ranging from silk painting and cyanotype to dance, sculpture, and performance. Ella's work has been shown across the U.S., including the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum and Southampton Arts Center here locally. Through projects like Between a Sea and a Shore, she invites audiences to reimagine their relationships with nature, history, and each other. Her art is not just visual, it moves, speaks, and listens. Ella has been a resident here at Moz House July 3rd. Her last day will be the 31st of 2025. And during her time here, she has led a cyanotype workshop at Bridgehampton Museum as part of our ongoing partnership titled Upon This Ground, and recently led an artist talk and cyanotype workshop as well at Longhouse Reserve as part of the Insider Outsider series in partnership with Mago Martinez and Esperanza Leon. Ella currently has work on view at Sylvester Manor in the outdoor grounds, which reckons with the history of enslavement and indigenous removal, and also has work in another show titled Weaving Words at Stony Brook University on view until November 22nd, 2025. Hopefully as well, we're still working this out, but perhaps Ella will have a piece or two at the Moz House booth Labor Day weekend here at Shinnecock if we're lucky. Welcome, Ella, to the podcast.
Thank you.
This first question, I want to talk about home. You grew up on Aquinnah, the western part of Martha's Vineyard, where your Wampanoag community is located, and experience both the seasonal tourism and the year-round visibility of indigenous community. I know that shaped a lot of your work, especially relating to belonging and the land. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how that upbringing influenced your relationship with art and identity, and how these influence your work today.
Sure. Yes, so I grew up almost entirely in Aquinnah. I was born there. I moved away for a few years, but we would come back every summer to see my grandma's. I called the island Grandma's Island growing up because we would go there and just spend the whole summer with her. So a lot of what I know about my culture and my people was just from experiencing the land and spending time with family members, spending time out in nature. I was just thinking about it today. Like, one of the major things that I associate with the place is connections to water through fishing and quahogging and collecting quahogs for wampum. I used to go out in the water and go scalloping with my uncles in the winter. And every time I take any friends back there still, like, the first thing we do is we go to the water and we show them everything you can eat, everything you can gather there. I think taking people to the place and showing them like where these stories happen make the stories make sense. Yeah, I think I'll continue more with the stories a little bit later. Maybe we'll get a little more specific, but that's how I started to experience it. I still think of the place in terms of the legends most of the time when I'm talking about it too.
Thank you for that. I wonder if we should jump right into this, maybe one of the particular stories. The story of Moshe plays a big role in a lot of your different art series and paintings.
Yeah, so Moshe is this giant that's in almost all of our stories. He is said to have created Nantucket, the Vineyard, and the Cape by dragging his toe through the water. So when he wanted to leave the mainland, he found Aquinnah, and he decided to stay there, and he dragged his toe all the way around the island to separate it from the mainland. And there are other stories about how he created Nantucket by throwing a crab over, and Nantucket transformed into a body of a land from that. He is in most of the stories that we still have in Aquinnah. From like when it's foggy out, people will say Moshe's smoking his pipe again, to if you've ever been to Aquinnah, like, you'll see the clay cliffs that are on the very, very far west end of the island, the furthest point. And if you walk out, you can see all the different colors. They go from red, black, yellow, gray, white. They say, I think this is the most known story about him, that he would take whales, grab them by the tail, and bang them against the cliffs for the people to eat. And that's how the cliffs got their color. Yeah, so a little bit dark. People are always shocked by that one when I tell them.
Definitely pretty intense.
Yeah.
Imagine that. I've never been there, but it sounds like the cliffs are pretty iconic.
Yeah.
Those stories, they are quite old. They passed down so many generations. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how does the story of Moshe connect to your present day, like day by day experience, whether it relates to survival, memory, and healing by telling those stories?
I think so. We have this story. Those are all the stories of his creating the land. And then we have the story that when he left, when the colonists came, or before they came, he said to the people, I'm going to leave. You guys could either stay here and deal with what's going to come, or you can turn into whales. I'll turn you into whales. And most people decided to stay and decided to figure out what was going to come. And we have this like kind of open-ended story from there. So it's like he left, he could return one day. And so I think like what I'm trying to do with my art is think about how the continued telling of this story can both share our culture, maintain the culture, and show our roots to the land by being so specific to the place. Now, more recently, since I've been here at Ma's house, I've been trying to explore like, what does that look like for the future? We have a lot of younger artists coming up now, people trying to bring back pieces of our traditional culture, but also show them to people in a way that shows that we're still here and we're still growing. And I think that with stories, we have this memory, again, that is so specific to the place, but it also leaves a lot of room for continuation of telling it and seeing what comes next. And I think personally, I've always been like, we have all these stories, we have these major characters. What happens next? We're still going. So I'm trying to think about what it could look like if we did turn into the whale, how having that option there leaves space for, again, us literally transforming and continuing our culture through that. So while I've been here, I've been drawing a lot of bones, painting whales from the mica tablet that was found here on Long Island, and then European depictions of whales around the same time. So comparing like what the story of whales, or what whales literally might have looked like depending on how you thought of them. If it's this creature that was dangerous, evil, monstrous, like in most European illustrations, or if it's more of a gentle figure. If you look at most indigenous illustrations, they're a little bit softer. They don't have like giant teeth or spikes sticking out of their heads. Yeah, it's interesting to compare the visuals and the stories at the same time.
I think it's so exciting that you're envisioning like how can we continue telling these stories, but maybe for new lessons or new contexts. I think that's part of keeping the culture alive. And I wonder, is this somewhat related to your work, somewhat related to like regional museums, whaling as a industry for extraction and almost toward extinction of whales was such a big part of the history in the Northeast. And you incorporate a lot of whale bones in the form of what would humans and whales look like together as a message. But I wonder if you could talk a little bit about maybe your relationship to those institutions and how do they support your work? Do you have criticism for, at least here on Long Island, there's a lot of museums that are maritime and they just show whale bones everywhere out of place without respect. And I wonder if you have a response to that type of thing.
I haven't directly engaged with any museums. I know that the museum in Massachusetts is the New Bedford Whaling Museum. That's one of the bigger ones that I know of. Yeah, we talked about this a little bit, and your mom also talked to me about it. Like, they don't acknowledge the indigenous presence in the whaling industry, or that we were the people here that already knew how to do it. We were oftentimes put at the front of the boat because we knew how to hunt already. I would like to, and I've been looking at national parks residencies to try and get more involved with the museums that are showing these whale bones. They have a lot of opportunity to do that, but also just trying to show more of the indigenous history and story side. Yeah, but the whale and human connection, I guess most of my exploration has been with what that might look like if we were to actually think about taking these creatures and giving them the respect that they deserved, but also that on the timeline that indigenous people and culture were wiped out, the whales are also being wiped out. And I've been thinking a lot about how land and all of these different animals and creatures were disrespected in the same way that we were.
Definitely. I think it's such a unique kind of cultural claim, the specificity of that story and how it reverberates. I wonder if you've ever thought about maybe just like the philosophical side of that question, like Moshe asking the community back then, would you rather stay people? Would you rather become whales? If you thought about that decision for yourself, or what does that symbolize outside of that literal question?
I think that like when I've heard it told, I hear people often like take a lot of pride from staying and like facing what was coming. And I also feel like the people that are still here that chose to be here have a kind of responsibility to keep telling the story and holding the culture and not just giving up in a way. Yeah, that does feel like a big responsibility that I didn't hear this ending part of the story with the whales until recently. And I think it was around the beginning of the pandemic that I started to hear this other part. Most of the time I just heard the beginning of the story and how the land was formed, but now I hear people telling the other part more. Kind of timely when people are starting to recognize that there are more indigenous people that are still here, that are everywhere on this land. And East Coast Native people don't get recognized often. People have no idea that we exist most of the time when they come to these vacation homes. That story is really important to keep telling, that we are still here and we chose to stay here and chose to stick it out and fight a little bit more.
I thank you for that. Maybe before we move on from the Moshop story, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, I think in my own research of indigenous like creation stories, at a certain point, like colonists enter into it. And of course, with tricksters being part of the characters, they play tricks on them or they deceive them and all these different interactions. But I wonder if there's anything with Moshop in terms of his return and how it relates to like how there's an overwhelming presence of non-native people on Martha's Vineyard and at Aquinnah. Do you have any future plans to incorporate like colonists as like characters in this work that you paint, or as a like an invitation to see themselves as bringing him back if they leave type of idea?
Ooh. I haven't thought about it that way. I've been thinking about the trickster more too, because I'm trying to show myself transforming into this whale figure. Maybe I should also play around with the trickster and think about the darker side or the more mischievous side. Because a lot of the trickster characters that are in these stories, they're not evil, they're just mischievous. They have to play tricks on people. Mm-hmm. And it's funny that you mentioned that, because a lot of the recent written down stories that I found have people collaborating on it because they were writing a children's book story or something. So it goes on for many pages instead of one short tale that might have been told originally. But there will be like people in the stories that are trying to sabotage people occasionally. Sabotage either Moshop or the tricksters. Cheapy is the mischievous spirit, the main one that we have.
You mentioned wampum earlier and collecting shells. That's a traditional art form. But a lot of the paintings and the narratives that you're depicting are painted upon silk as a material. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what drew you to silk and what the medium allows compared to more traditional mediums, whether it's like oral stories, wampum belts, or anything else.
The silk I started because I think it was, first of all, like the way it moved. I associate wind and sound with Aquinnah, hearing the waves all the time. So I like to imagine myself like standing on the edge of the cliffs, and you can hear the wind like going by the land, but you can also hear the waves from all around you because it's this open end of piece of land right at the end of the island. So when I started doing the silks, I wanted to do them for a dance performance originally. So it was like, I want something that people can interact with, that I can bring outside, that'll also play with the light. I was also teaching little kids a lot at the time. So we would play around with shadow puppets, or we'd play with moving fabric as just a toy. So kids influence me a lot. It's easy to connect with stories with kids. And I kept doing it, I think, because of the colors and the vibrancy. It really stands out because of that and the way that it plays with the light. But it's also easy to roll up and move places. Living in New York, I had to get a little creative.
Speaking of wind and movement and play, your work not only moves, but performance is also part of the experience. And I've unfortunately not seen any of your live performances, but I wonder if you could talk a bit about why you made this decision not just to do visual art, but also incorporate yourself as a dancer and have a whole performance group as part of the work.
The dance part came as a collaboration. I've played with it a little bit on my own, but I think I prefer to do it with other people. I like the aspect of bringing intergenerational community and people who know different parts of the story than I do. I can only tell it from my side. So in this dance performance I've been working on for, I think it's almost been 7 years now. It's a collaboration with Danza Organica and a few tribal members. There are about 9, I think, tribal members that collaborate on a show that has dance, music, oral storytelling, my paintings. And so I can't take credit for all of this, but I've taken pieces that I really liked and continued using them in my own art, the way it moves and the way I try to bring in other people to show it, to like collaborate in bringing pieces into the water. This main show I've been working on, it's called Asna Pamakoman, which means we still dance. And it goes through all of the hardships that the Aquinnah Wampanoag people have faced, where we continue to face them, and then how we move through the challenges and find some joy in our culture again. I think the movement of the silk and incorporating dance lets me connect to the stories more fully when you're actually trying to embody the thing. I think I'm trying to do that more with the material now too. Instead of just doing silk painting with synthetic inks, I'm trying to do more cyanotype, actually gather plants from around where I am. Cyanotype gets you to collect whatever's available in the season that you're doing it. So I'm trying to use more of that to get the process and the end result and the material all connected. I think overall this dance performance has just allowed me to embody and feel the story a lot more. I don't know that I was making art about these stories before, or in a way that I really felt was that important or changing for me or anybody around me. I think I was more trying to tell more fairy tale stories, more just working on oil paintings. I was taught as a very classically trained painter, so while I love to make a hyper-realistic oil painting, it doesn't always feel that connected to the place. Yeah.
Definitely. And I was going to move on to another question, but then you mentioned fairy tales as describing the creation stories. And usually when you go into libraries or bookstores, that's the only place you can really find these narratives. I wonder if you could talk a bit about if there was like a moment that clicked for you for when these went from like children's stories or fairy tales into something that's worth pursuing as an artist and celebrating.
Good question. I think it took a while. It's probably around the same time that I started this performance, but I think that after moving to New York, you move away from your home, you feel a disconnect to the place in the story. And I think being away for so long, I was looking for a way to keep connecting back to the place and to Aquinnah. So I started taking a creative writing course, actually. It was gauged toward mostly fiction, but there were a lot of people in the class that were working on stories that were vaguely about something they'd grown up with, like some story they'd grown up with. And I started researching other tribes, legends, like a lot of stories from around Northeast mostly, and trying to look for things that I hadn't heard before from Wampanoag culture. And so I guess it started with writing, and then in writing all of these stories from other places down and trying to research them and then come up with my own, I realized that the stories don't feel the same as a fairy tale because I know them like in my core. And I think that's where dancing it and feeling it in your body a little more comes in. And I talked to a lot of my elders at this time too, and they were like, we believe in this. This is this is the story of this place. It's not a fairy tale. It's a legend, and it shows our history here too. Yeah, and it was interesting like reading so many other stories and being like, oh, I really know this one though, and that is where I think I can keep learning from. Like the other ones, I want to hear them from other people.
That's so great. Going back to collaborations, I wanted to ask a little bit about your cyanotype kind of education and workshops. So not only are you an artist and educator back home, but during your time here on the East End and during your residency, you've led cyanotype workshops at Longhouse Reserve, also at Bridgehampton Museum earlier in the month. I wonder if you could talk about how this process of teaching cyanotype informs your work. Aside from you just teaching the technique, does it inspire you to change the way that you approach cyanotype? One other thing I wanted to mention is because of the weather at Longhouse, we did individual cyanotypes, but you had an idea to do one collective one. I wonder if you could talk about that as well.
Yeah, it was pouring rain like right before we started the talk. We couldn't lay it on the ground. Just wash away the cyanotype from the silk. These two, we worked on fabric and paper for the first one, and I collected plants from around Ma's house and some at the beach. And I've been using paper cutouts on mine a lot. Going back to like the shadow puppets and storytelling, I like to create these little characters to add into the cyanotype itself. But I think from teaching it a couple times to people, it's always different. It's an experiment because it's so sun dependent, time dependent. People arrange their pieces in different compositions, so it'll get very different effects whether you're working with a piece that's sitting really flat or something that's sitting up, or you move the objects on the set paper. But I like the idea of creating a collaborative piece, I think, because it allows people again to like work with this one idea, and eventually hopefully I'll be able to actually do that with the piece that I'd planned. I had this question for everybody at the end of my Longhouse talk. It was like, how does telling your story continue your survivance, or something similar to that? How does shape-shifting your story continue your survivance? And I think that getting different perspectives on that would have been really interesting, because then we can get into, we're working with plants, we're working with things that are surrounding us right now. How does sharing the story of these pieces and us right now, and like almost creating this image together, allow us to collaborate, to recognize the land, to listen to each other a little bit better, and then also be able to pass stories between each other. It was nice to do a couple different workshops to see how different ages react to it and how people think about doing it. Some people have more questions about the chemicals and how I set it up. It's really exciting to see people get excited.
Oh, definitely. And speaking of sharing stories, you also have another project, Between a Sea and a Shore, where you've also invited participants to share their stories about water, including how it cares for them and how they care for it. I wonder if you have any memorable stories from that experience, from what you've gathered, and how they might have informed a piece or your future work.
That one, the one that I remember most, and I would love to continue doing this, was a story that somebody told me about being afraid of the water when they were a kid, and their dad would just throw them into the water. I think that might have been why they were afraid originally, because he'd just pick them up and throw them in. And eventually he did it enough times and he would keep catching the kid after he jumped into the water or was thrown by somebody else, that he realized that this was actually a safe thing to do. The piece was meant to collect stories and also think about the importance of having access to water, especially for Indigenous people. Another one, this one was the first time I asked this question. I don't think it was actually part of that project, but I talked to my mom, and she talked about her dad. And this was a story I'd never heard her tell before, but she talked about her dad and him spending time on the water, taking her down there in the mornings, and she would just watch him. I think instilled a sense of connection for her to this place, but also to her family. And being able to still tell this story and have the experience of connecting with her family through the water and through fishing and doing fun activities on the beach. She is able to carry that on, but also just have these memories that she can hold on to. Yeah.
Oh, definitely. I think in your few days ago presentation, you showed a lot of fun on the beach. I think you're continuing that. I did want to talk a little bit about, since we're talking about land and the shore, I think it's so awesome that you have a permanent series of works at the Long Island Children's Museum. In their entryway in the windows, some of your transparent silk pieces, along with a few types in the garden as well. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that experience. That was part of their land acknowledgement for their institution. Did you just briefly want to talk about, if people want there to visit the work, what is the general theme behind that series of paintings and how it connects to the land acknowledgement?
Yeah, there's 4 paintings inside their lobby, if you walk in, that are there permanently, and they moving from left to go through 4 periods of time, from legend to pre-colonization, colonization, where we are now, and where we want to go eventually. I think the thing that changes through each of them is the amount of houses, people, animals, and then how people are occupying the land in the images. There are also 5 outside cyano type pieces that are thinking a little bit more about not how we could, but how you actually do show respect for the land and the people that have been there by taking care of it. The idea was that on the day that we put them up, we also planted seeds. We did a couple workshops with the kids and talked to them about what it looks like to care for a place. The museum's for mostly 3 to 5-year-olds, so it's a lot of fun to hear from little kids. They love being outside and connecting with the place, and they get it really easily. I think that for the parents, it's a little more of a new thought to really think about how you're engaging with the place. The museum did a really good job. I think they're still trying to build on the land acknowledgement and actually activate that instead of just having a written piece. That's great.
That's awesome. I also wanted to talk a little bit about, you move in a whole different direction, still in, I guess, education, but how you use language in your work. So the piece that's at Sylvester Manor, it's a prayer for the land, for essentially the atrocities that happen there and how it still needs to be reconciled. I guess for those who don't know, there was a unmarked burial grounds that has African and Indigenous remains there, and part of the work of the outdoor sculpture, I guess it's a park, is just reckoning with that theme. So you have a piece that is suspended from the trees. It has Indigenous language on there. Also for the show that's at Stony Brook, you incorporated similar language. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about maybe future iterations of how you'll incorporate language and how you sit down with either the Algonquin dictionary or the Bible or whatever resource that you look at.
Yeah, I think these are the first two. Maybe I did one piece before where I was testing out using like actually written language on the pieces. I started taking language classes over Zoom pretty recently, like 2020, 2021, when they went online, and was able to learn a little bit more of the Wampanoag. And I wanted to use the language, and I think I'll continue using it. Maybe not fully written as I have, but I don't know. We'll see. We'll experiment. But it feels weird to talk about oral histories without using the language. And when I started doing the language classes online, I started learning a lot more of like how specific the words are, and how like in each word it's a specific description of like how you interact with that thing or that place. In Algonquin, there's animate and inanimate. And so you don't think of like in Spanish, you'll have like masculine or feminine verbs. We have animate and inanimate. And then within that, there's a lot about your relationship to the thing you're talking about as you're speaking. I think I described the other day, one of my teachers told me if you were going to say that means my land, you're not saying I own this land. You're saying like my land as in I am part of the land, and everything that comes between the creator and the land is then something that is a part of you. So we would say atuman, that's creator, and then natakim is the land. But when you put the na in front of it, you're saying that everything in between there is something that is connected to you. Yeah, I have this idea of like actually speaking and doing sound pieces with the language and incorporating that more, especially if I'm going to keep doing the silk pieces. I started playing around with shells and try to make chimes with them and have some like essence of language or sound there instead of having it be so obvious. But we'll see where I go with it. I have to collect a lot of shells for this.
That's so exciting. Can't wait to see what you come up with. I also wanted to talk about your maybe upcoming project, if it's not too sensitive, and I'll probably get some details wrong, but it's a venue called Rock House Reservation in West Brookfield, Massachusetts. And you're going to be commissioned to do a large outdoor installation, potentially with silk resin and shell chimes. And it's going to be a hand reaching into the landscape.
Yeah, the project is going to be for the Trustees of Reservations Triennial next year. They do this project called Art in the Landscape, where they bring in and commission artists all over Massachusetts to make artwork that just goes on the landscape. And I think it'll be up from next spring 2026 through about the next year. The spot that I chose, I had a couple different options. This one I chose because I loved the landscape so much, but also the description of the place, if you looked it up, it just says this is a glacially deposited, a lot of the rocks there are glacially deposited, so they have these huge boulders all over the property. You can walk on top of them. The spot that I'm going to do the installation, you can go inside this kind of like little lemon squeeze between the rocks. It feels like a house almost, where one rock is leaning to the other, creating like an A-frame. But it says that, and then otherwise on the description, it's like, this used to be a picnic place, and we know that Native Americans probably walked through here and used the land for trading or a trail. That's about it. They don't really have any other thing about who would have been at this place. The Nipmuc tribe is really close, and so I wanted to do something again with the story of Moshup. So I'm making this giant hand. I started to think about Moshup as a glacier because of the way he's literally carving out and moving the land. So I chose to do this hand reaching down. It'll be a cast fabric wrapped around this mold that's going to be then like resin cast. And then it's going to reach down and there will be hanging above the path, so you can walk under it, these pieces cut to look like a water ripple when you're standing underneath it, and then have the chimes. The idea there is that the hand is reaching down and quite literally like creating a ripple. The chimes will be symbolize the language coming back, the language and stories that were told there. And then the hand is meant to be like a part of the story that is of that place.
So, such a great imagery with the giant, and so many stories to pull from for this and then future projects as well. Speaking of which, are there any other future things that you're excited about where you're going to be featured, whether it's programs or exhibits coming up?
So far, I don't have any big things. I have a show coming up on the island when I go back there mid-August. I'm trying to actually put together a curated show with my brother. Hopefully he's into this. We'll see if he's fully committed. But we just got asked to do something with the Martha's Vineyard Museum. They want to spotlight more Indigenous art and younger artists and people that grew up with the stories that we're both trying to tell, like more modern motion stories, and think about where we can take this. He's a filmmaker and photographer. I do the painting and performance. That wouldn't be till at least the end of next summer, but maybe the one after. But if it happens, would be like my first time fully curating and organizing a show, which I'm really excited for. I have this idea that I want to bring in other people to do talks and activate the space while it's there. And I've never had the opportunity to do this, or something that really revolves around like an institutional space like that. I think it would be a lot of fun, and I would love to do it during the summer on Martha's Vineyard. There are a lot of people there, so we can really put this story out there and show people the versions of contemporary Native art that are being made on the island, and also spotlight our cultural center if we can a little bit. To be determined.
Oh yeah, looking forward to receiving pics, hopefully visit one day.
Yeah.
Also, if you'd like to see Ella's artist talk at Longhouse Reserve, it should be on their YouTube channel soon. But thank you, Ella, for participating in the podcast and being here in the Moss House residency.
Thank you. It's been so much fun.